Skipping an intake or a meet and greet before promising a student a spot in your lesson program is one of the biggest mistakes that you can make as an adaptive, or also called therapeutic, horseback riding instructor or equine assisted services program in general. My name is Saber Popoli. I'm the owner and founder of Hoof and Footfalls, and I have spent well over 15 years immersed in the equine assisted services industry, and I have personally performed hundreds of intakes on potential students that are coming into large size programs all the way down to my personal private program where it's just me and my horses and my students, and we don't really have support persons. I can tell you that no matter if you're at a large program where it's a director, several instructors, a lot of horses, a lot of volunteers, several students, or down to something where it's just a smaller operation with one instructor, few horses, handful of students, the concept that an intake or that meet and greet before you even talk about scheduling that student is something that absolutely must happen to set everybody up for success and make sure that you and that potential student, who hopefully is a future student, start off on the right foot. And it's an absolute must for a professional onboarding of a new student into your program. So I want to take some time to go ahead and give you my whys and some personal experiences I've had behind why I really, really strongly encourage you to make sure that you are implementing a mandatory intake or meet and greet, whatever you want to call it, with new incoming students. And it is an absolute shock to me when I hear instructors and programs say that they'll get application paperwork or maybe do a phone call and then they schedule that student in, and the poor instructor then is kind of like, okay, well, I guess I was told kind of rough height and weight, maybe a diagnosis, and then they have to go off of the minimal information that they got. Or maybe it was even a school group and they're like, okay, well, there's a group of 8 students coming out, good luck. That's setting everybody up for failure. So I have personally experienced time and time again that what we see on paper, and even if you take that extra step of a phone call screening, which you should do both, you should have phone call screening, making sure it's initially an okay, good match before you send over paperwork and have them, waste time potentially filling out paperwork when the phone screening could have said, hey, like, this is just maybe not the right fit for you, or whatever it is. Those are so different than what we see in person. And, there's that famous saying out there that applies to not just autism, but also several different diagnoses. Actually, most of them is once you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, or once you've met one person with Down syndrome, you've met one person with Down syndrome, because each individual, even though they might have a certain diagnosis or, that label that's on that piece of paper, who they are as a person and how the different factors of their diagnosis impact them physically, cognitively, and emotionally varies person to person. And even how a parent or a caregiver might describe them to you over the phone is so different than what we might actually see in person when we do that meet and greet. So it's one of those steps that we cannot skip. And here are the whys. So with the whys, I'm also going to explain how my meet and greets, or intake, if you want to call it, works. I do this for every single student that wants to sign up for my program. And right now it's actually who wants to get on my waiting list. And my program right now is an inclusive program. So I offer traditional lessons, and then I also offer adaptive, or some people call them therapeutic. They're the same thing. And then everything kind of in between. So like all those students that kind of fall in between like a traditional and an adaptive lesson. So that's my sweet spot. It's what I love. Anyways, so every single student that wants to come into my program, I require that we do a meet and greet. In my brain, the more formal wording would be intake. You can call it whatever you want. Basically, I'm going to communicate with that family and have them come out to my location. That initial communication, one, is making sure that can they follow instructions they're going to find the property to before our first scheduled lesson if we get that far. And then also, can they actually show up on time? Or are they already starting off this potential student-instructor relationship off with running late and poor time management? Because that might be a potential warning flag to me about, oh boy, is this going to be something going on with the lessons? And do I really need to reinforce my time management policy and late arrival policy verbally if they show up late? Or do they communicate if they're running late? So anyways, from the get-go, it's a way to kind of get a read on that family or the potential student and how they are with finding the location, and then also making sure that they are on time and follow the directions that are given to them verbally and in any written communication that I give them. So then once we do the meet and greet and they arrive on property, from that first moment that I am meeting that student, I'll have in the back of my mind what I had discussed over the phone with either the student or their parent or caregiver, whoever I talk to. I'm going to have it in the back of my mind, but from that very first interaction, I am going to be observing everything about that student as it comes to their physical ability, cognitive ability, emotional ability, and everything in between. Because I want to make sure that, one, I'm equipped as an instructor to appropriately serve them. Do I have the skills and the training? Is my facility going to be a good match for them? Or do I need to refer them out to somewhere where they need a ramp because they can't walk up my steps to my platform? Because I don't have a wheelchair ramp here. I have a mounting platform. But you still got to be able to navigate up those steps. That's one of my requirements here. Is this a student that is able to follow instructions from mom and dad or whoever the parent or caregiver is? Am I seeing some type of resistant behavior there? What are they wearing? I asked that they actually wear lesson appropriate clothing to the intake and the meet and greet to see how that student is going to respond to the dress code or the dress policy here at my barn. So again, we can kind of already get a read on that and cross that bridge before we commit to lessons. And then I find out that they only wear Crocs, and that's going to be a no-go for my lessons. So we can get that out of the way. I'm going to approach the student and greet them directly. And I'm going to try to talk to that student as much as possible and ask them questions, even if they're not necessarily fully verbal or there's limited communication. I do also talk to the parents and the caregivers, but I do my best to try to see how much I can get out of that student communication-wise, just to kind of get a read on them. Then as we go into the barn area, I'm going to be watching how that student interacts again with the parents, how they're following instructions that I'm giving them. Are they a runner? Do they have any issues of self-regulation or self-control? Are they scared of the horses? What is their demeanor saying kind of all together? I'm also watching them walk and move. What is their gait like? Do I notice spasticity? Are they low tone? Can they push open and close my barn gate? There's tons of different things that are going to tell me kind of where that student is at physically and cognitively. And then that's going to be plugging into place what might be a good horse match, tack and equipment, and then how I'm going to approach that first mount and dismount as well. So this intake or meet and greet, whatever you want to call it, is so essential to being able to be prepared that first lesson if we end up actually scheduling them. And kind of back up, reverse, before we even arrive on property, I do make sure I am very, very, very clear with the parents and caregivers that we will not be riding a horse that day. And that's one of the first things I say when they get out of their car too, is thanks for showing up. We're going to meet the horses, but remember, our feet are staying on the ground today. We're not riding. This is just to make sure that you're comfortable here. You get to meet the horses, you get to meet me and ask questions, and then we'll go from there. And I don't even say, and then I'll see you at your next lesson. We haven't even got to that point yet. So there we go. Just a little caveat there, because I have had parents promise that their kids are going to ride, and then the kid shows up, and then I'm the one who crashes their hopes and dreams, and I'm the evil person then. So I have gotten much better about making it very, very clear multiple times that we are not riding, because I assumed in my brain people thought that an intake and a meet and greet didn't equal riding and a lesson, but that's a common misunderstanding, and that was my mistake, and I have fixed that mistake so that I am not the evil person who says that you can't ride today. So I'm observing them and planning ahead for horse and tack and equipment. For me personally, I only have a few horses and a few options when it comes to tack and equipment. So I want to make sure that the height and the weight and the build of that student matches what was told to me when I did that first little interview on the phone. I don't have them fill out paperwork until I know they're actually going to get scheduled. So I don't go off of paperwork. I have notes that I took, with diagnosis and all that, if there is that, and key information like potential or their estimated height and weight. But I also want to make sure that my tack and my equipment is going to work for that student. If you're on more of a large scale program where you're doing an intake and then you assign that student to an instructor and a horse and a time of day, this intake is going to be that crucial time that what slot they need to fit into class-wise, like ability-wise, temperament-wise with other students, what tack and horse and type of mount and dismount, and maybe instructor personality that you kind of ideally want to pair them with. Some of them you have some wiggle room, and some students it's absolutely it's either this horse or no horse, and you've got to fit in the saddle, and you know what? It's actually looking like you're not going to, so therefore let's offer you something else. But at least I didn't promise them a spot in my program, and then I meet them that first lesson and it's like, oh boy, what did I get myself into? Because I thought the paperwork and what you told me on the phone was something way different. Been there, done that. Don't ever want to experience or do that again, because that is a horrible situation that I got myself into. I got other instructors into that I had handed them off to. And then also, that's a situation that I put that family and that student into, which I could have prevented being the professional one of this interaction, where I should have taken that step beforehand to set everybody up for success. So watching for that motion so I can plan ahead, their motion, temperament, all that, planning ahead for horse, tack, equipment, instructor, if you have multiple instructors at the program, and seeing where they're going to fit into there. Then we're going to go meet some horses. Are they afraid of the horse? Is there a certain horse that they kind of gravitate to? I never promise that they're going to be on a certain horse, even if I'm like, okay, yeah, they're going to be, I want to schedule them. Let's move forward with this. I do not promise a certain horse. And then I also start kind of introducing the mindset of my program of you might get assigned a horse initially, but it's one we might try out a little bit for a few rides, and then we might switch up kind of depending on what we see, because I have a good guess. I've done this for a while, but once I've seen you on that horse, or if somebody is lame that day for whatever reason, we might have to switch it up, and that's just part of how we roll here. And so that from day one is establishing I have say over what horse you go on. You can absolutely express that you like a certain horse, but students do not dictate what horse that they go on. And that is something that I establish right from that initial intake or meet and greet. As we are getting to meet the horses and see how they're interacting, and if they're afraid, I'm going to see again, are they trying to go climb fences, or are they really bothered by the flies? I had that one where parents did not know how much the bugs were going to bother the student, and getting the dust on their clothing because it's a dirt environment. And that ended up being a non-negotiable for that kiddo. And we had to revisit it a year later after they had gone out and done more dirty play out in the dirt. Because once we got in that barn setting, we figured out that they were not ready because of the bugs and the dirt and everything, and getting their clothing dirty and the dust on the bottom of their pants. And had we scheduled them into a lesson before knowing this, then we would have gone through all these steps to get them scheduled and shown up, and then had a massive failure of it not going well. So anyways, that has happened before, where it's these random things that you don't think are going to happen. And it's oh, well, glad I figured this out beforehand. Another thing that we can also kind of figure out is helmets. Is the student actually going to tolerate wearing a helmet? I have a whole separate video on how to deal with students that are resistant to helmets and don't like them, and strategies and methods that you can use to hopefully, from this initial intake, set them up for success, and things that you can do in future lessons if you do schedule them from that point. But ultimately, how is that student going to respond to the helmet? Will they wear it, or is it something that we're going to have to use some of those methods to help prepare them before we actually try to book them for a lesson? So we want to be looking and seeing how they react to the lessons in general. Do they have a super small or maybe larger size head that we need to figure out how we're going to get that size of helmet if we don't have that yet in our available stock, or they need to go order a custom one for them? Whatever's the situation there with that helmet as well. Still, as we're progressing through the barn, still noting physical, cognitive, emotional abilities. How do they handle sudden noises of like a horse sneezing or a gate clanging, or the different terrain going from flatter ground to maybe walking out in the sandy arena? I'll go have them walk up and down where they're going to be mounting the horse, so I can see, can they go up my platform? Can they go up the ramp? How are they on a raised surface? Those are all things that we can figure out during that intake or that meet and greet before we then have to troubleshoot this and go in blind, and we've already committed to scheduling them to a lesson. Which, if it's a private lesson, okay, not as big of a deal, but I've also set this family up for an expectation that we are going to do lessons when maybe it's not a good fit and we need to iron some things out, or just maybe not go with it at all, and we could have solved that during the intake. So another thing that I have gotten much better about as an instructor, and this is something that I hear other instructors in other programs really struggle with as well, and they're like, the families are just so resistant when I ask them to follow through with this policy or whatever it is, whether it's shoes, your billing, your late payments, your late arrivals, whatever it is. And usually the root problem is we have not verbalized enough what our program policies are. We think that they're going to read that whole fat intake packet and understand all of our 20, 30 program policies or whatever that they're initialing. Little hint, they're not going to read it all. They're not going to remember it, and they're probably not going to think it's super important. I will be the first to admit I am horrible about just like initialing stuff for the things that my kids go do. And I really don't read all of the policies and procedures. I'm going to assume that if we sign up for something, that coach or that instructor is going to tell me the really important policies so that I can follow them. I have gotten much better at doing that as an instructor, and that is like one of the really, really important reasons why I do the intake, is because I verbalize my like make or break it policies that I have in play that sometimes set me apart from other programs, so that I can look the family in the eye, that student or their parent and caregiver, and make sure they understand what my policies are on helmets, on dress codes, on my makeup cancellation credits, which I have a whole video on that as well, and how I don't do makeups. I don't do credits. I do credits for when I cancel, but if they cancel, they are paying for a spot in my program. And I get to verbalize like the whys behind my program policies. And if I get a hint of resistance, I dig into that a bit more to make sure that that's not going to be a sticking point to where they sign up and then say, oh no, I didn't know that that was your rules. And oh, never mind, I don't want to do that. And then I'm fighting this battle down the road when I assumed they read my whole packet of policies when they didn't, or they even read the welcome email and I assumed that they saw those. Well, they didn't. I need to verbally tell them over and over and over again, not just in the intake, but also at the first lesson and at the first and second time that those things happen. So we have got to do a much better job as instructors of verbalizing our policies, and that starts at that intake or that meet and greet. And I cannot tell you the world of difference it has made with preventing and being proactive about those really uncomfortable, like enforcing policies situations when I just clear the air and get it out of the way, and they enroll knowing that those are the important policies that are a non-negotiable and just how I roll here. And if families are like, oh no, actually, like, well, I'm a little concerned about that because I don't know if it'll work for my family. Cool. Either we talk about it and we sort it out and it was a misunderstanding, or they just needed further clarification, or I refer them to another program and tell them, hey, make sure you ask them if this is also their policy and maybe their format is a better fit for you. And that is okay. I'm not going to try to shove a square peg into a round hole and try to make it work when they're not my ideal student and my program is not going to be a good fit for them, and it's just going to create heartburn down the road. It's okay. And I would rather find that out during the intake and that meet and greet process. So make sure you're verbalizing all the policies. And then again, during that first lesson down the road, once you do schedule, and make sure it's in your welcome email, like hit all those things that you're going to be hearing about over and over and over. You have to be proactive about verbalizing it and reinforcing it over and over and over again. Another thing I want to make sure is a really good fit as well is just like my teaching style and my methodology and how I progress students. I talk about how I do that. I also make sure I interact a lot with the student and also start kind of softly testing that relationship between instructor and potential student of following instructions. Do they listen when they're redirected? Like all of those things. And if I get some type of pushback, not really from the student, because like I'm good working through that. If I get pushback from the parents or the caregivers on my methods or my teaching techniques in that intake, I'm going to dig into that a bit more and see like, okay, well, why did you make that comment? Or, do you have a suggestion on this? Or like, what, if they said something, okay, why did you say that statement? I'd like to understand better, and not confronting them and getting into an argument at all. I want to understand that we're on the same page, because I totally get that my teaching methodology, my personality even, is not a fit for everyone. I am pretty traditional and very classical, like academic mindset or academy mindset for all of my students, no matter if they are traditional students or my adaptive or therapeutic or equine assisted learning. I have very high expectations behaviorally for all of my students, and I know they can do it. But if parents and caregivers are not on board, that's okay. I'm just not a good fit, but I would rather discover that then during the intake and our meet and greet. And again, no hurt feelings at all. In all honesty and transparency, it used to bother me when like we would kind of maybe have that little bit of not agreement on how to handle something, or like they weren't okay with the student being redirected or like held accountable for something, like which actually can happen in like a very short meeting time, as strange as that sounds. But I've had some interesting situations where like it just wasn't a fit, and I used to take that personal, and I've gotten a whole lot better of just, it's okay, and I need to know that now. I'm not going to make everybody happy. I'm not a good fit for everyone. Just like when I go somewhere, I'm not always going to be 100% a fit for that activity or that instructor or that doctor or whatever it is. So that applies to me also as a person. So I don't take it personal anymore. And it's, again, one of those things of I'd rather face it now than face it a few weeks down the road and discover that, ooh, wow, we are not a good fit. And now we're in this really awkward situation. And it's just not a good thing. Once we've gone through all of that in that intake or meet and greet, then at the end, if everything is going okay, and I've also been asking questions to clarify the diagnosis and make sure like they haven't left out, oh yeah, they actually do have seizures, uncontrolled seizures, drop seizures, something that like might be a contraindication or maybe just a precaution and I need to dig into it more and they forgot to mention that on the application, or maybe thought on that if they put it on there that it would be an automatic no, whatever it is. So I'm going to be asking clarifying questions if that student does have some type of diagnosis. That is something too that I usually ask the parent or the caregiver before I meet them in person, like, is this something you openly discuss in front of your student? Because I have ran into the past situations where the student didn't know that they had a diagnosis and I accidentally said something in front of them, and then the parent was like, it was like I dropped a grenade in the room and like everyone was scrambling and like, oh no, they can't hear that. And that was a very awkward situation. So I asked the parent or the caregiver how they handle that situation in front of their student before we get to that situation. If they're completely hiding the fact that their student has a diagnosis, that is on them. And that is their choice. They have the full right to do that. That is them. But I also, that's sometimes a little warning flag of, ooh, you know what? They may not like my methods here of talking about how we all learn differently and how all of our brains are different and our bodies are different. And we need to figure out what works for us. Because that then might start the questions along the line of why are they maybe different than peers. So like, again, just something of, I would want to make sure that my methods then are not going to conflict with how the parents or the caregivers want to handle that student learning about how every person is different, specifically them as it relates to other people. It might not be a problem. It may, but again, something we could deal with during that intake or meet and greet. So once we've gone through all of that, everything looks good. Then I'm going to be talking about scheduling. So what is their schedule like? Here are my days and times. Initially on my phone, I will tell people these are the lesson days and times that I offer. Will this fit into your schedule? If it's a hard no, like, no, we only want Sundays. Okay, my program's not a fit. Here's a reference. So like general scheduling time, I do screen up front. But as far as like actually putting them into a potential lesson time, that is something I do after the fact. I say, hey, I think this is going to be a really good fit. On my side, I would like to move forward with potentially enrolling you guys or putting you on wait list, depending on where we're at. And like if I have a horse available, tack available, or if I think I might not yet, but they would be maybe next on the list. And then, would you guys like to move forward with looking at a schedule and seeing what classes are open now that I know what horse and tack would probably be a good match? And then we go from there. And then you can get into the whole scheduling negotiation and all of that. Or not negotiation, but you can offer them the days and the times available that will work for them and also work well for the instructor, the horse, the tack, and the maybe even the class matching that you have in mind if you need to put them into a group lesson. Okay. So I hope through explaining how my intakes or my meet and greets work for all of my students and how I've conducted them in the past and all the awkward situations I've run into and now am able to prevent through a really solid intake process or meet and greet process. I hope this has been enough to convince you to make that intake an absolute must before you schedule a student for their first lesson. And even if you are not going to be the instructor teaching that student for the first time, if anything, that's actually even more of a reason that you should be doing it, is so that you have all the information possible and you have seen firsthand what that potential student is like. So you can prepare the poor instructor that's going to be walking in blind to that first lesson just going off of what you gave them. So I really, really hope that you consider implementing intakes for all of your students, no matter what type of program they're going to be coming into. Also implement it for school groups or group outings, group homes, whatever it is, intake. Even if you have to go there and you do an intake at the facility and then make sure that everything is good to go there. Intakes before they come out is crucial, especially if you're going to be doing mounted work. Unmounted, maybe a little bit more wiggle room, but just for the sake of consistency and just all the weird things I've encountered over the years, just do them. Just do intakes. Make it your policy. If it is something you already do, bravo, keep doing it. Don't let that go away if you're getting pushback about like all the time and stuff that is going into it. Usually I don't hear it that way. Usually once you do it, it's like this good thing and it keeps going and you're like, oh my gosh, why did we never do this before? But if you are getting pushback about it, use this video, use my examples. I'm happy to back you up on it. Keep doing what you're doing if you are. If you have not been doing them consistently or have not done them ever, start doing them as soon as you can. And I guarantee it is absolutely worth that extra step you take to plan that intake and that meet and greet. Hold off promising them a spot. Make sure you're a good match for them. They're a good match for you. And you're going to save so much heartburn and heartache and weird, awkward situations, which if you don't like conflict, this is going to help you out a lot. So do this and be proactive and set yourself up for success. Start that student-teacher relationship off on a really good really good first step forward. Make sure they understand your policies, just so you're not having to battle any of this down the road. It can be done. It is so worth it. And I would love to hear from you. Do you already consistently implement a student intake? Have you implemented it in the past, but maybe you've let it kind of fall off? Is it something that you have never done and you aren't sure that you should do it? I'd love to hear from you. Give me your input, give me your feedback in the comments. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, share this with other instructors. You can share this with board members and with executive directors. I don't care. Use this information to help your program grow and to be the best it can be and to grow you as an instructor if you're the one in charge of intakes. Or maybe you're that poor instructor walking in blind to a lesson with a student you really don't know much about and you're like, hey, look, this will solve the problem of the heartburn I have of having to go teach a lesson basically blind and be put in these awkward situations. So love to hear from you down in the comments. And as always, you can either contact me down in the comments or through Messenger or email. And I would love to hear from you what types of questions you have, what topics you want to learn about as it relates to adaptive, or also called therapeutic horseback riding, any adaptive or therapeutic groundwork, and also just teaching horseback riding in general and good solid teaching theory and technique.